Brad and his lab partner, Angie, mixed a small amount of starch into a test tube of water. Then they added iodine, which stained the starch molecules blue. Next, they added saliva to the test tube. After 30 minutes, the blue color disappeared. This exercise demonstrates the consequences of metabolism in the absence of homeostasis. Described in Chapter 1, homeostasis often involves a balance of chemical reactions that will make or break molecules, such as starch. In the test tube, only one reaction occurred. After reading this chapter, you will have learned that the rate of a chemical reaction can be greatly increased by enzymes in cells and body fluids, and you will understand the roles of two chemical phenomena, activation energy and decomposition reactions. Considering the properties of enzymes in the chemical reactions, can you explain why the blue color in the test tube disappeared? The chemical basis of life. Life is chemistry. Chemicals compose the structures of our bodies, and the interactions of chemicals with one another are responsible for the body's functions. Nerve impulse generation, digestion, muscle contraction, and metabolism can be described in chemical terms, and so can many abnormal conditions and illnesses, as well as their treatments. These diverse functions all involved intricate interactions between molecules. For example, chemicals in saliva interact with food and aid in digestion, and membrane proteins assemble to form a pore for ions to pass into and out of our cells to aid in nerve impulse generation and muscle contraction. To understand anatomy and physiology, it is essential to have a basic knowledge of chemistry, the scientific discipline concerned with the atomic composition of substances and the reactions they undergo. This chapter is not a comprehensive treatment of chemistry, but it does review some of the basic chemical concepts related to living systems. When necessary, refer back to this chapter when chemical processes are discussed later in the book. 2.1. Basic chemistry. Matter, mass, and weight. All living and non-living things are composed of matter, which is anything that occupies space and that has mass. Mass is the amount of matter in an object, and weight is the gravitational force acting on an object of a given mass. For example, the weight of an apple results from the force of gravity pulling the apple's mass. The international unit for mass is the kilogram, which is the mass of a platinum iridium cylinder kept in the International Bureau of Weights and Measurements in France. The mass of all other objects is compared with the cylinder. For example, 2.2 pound lead weight and 1 liter 1.06 quart of water each have a mass of approximately 1 kilogram. An object with 1/1000th of a mass of a kilogram has a mass of 1 gram. Elements and atoms. An element is the simplest type of matter, having a unique chemical properties. A list of the elements commonly found in the human body appears in Table 2.1. About 96% of the body's weight results from the elements oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen. The majority of the body's weight is from oxygen. Oxygen is also the most abundant element in the Earth's crust. Carbon plays an especially important role in the chemistry of the body, due in part to its propensity to form covalent bonds with itself and other molecules. Many elements are present in only trace amounts, but still play an essential role in the body. Elements can have multiple roles and exist in different states of the body. For example, mineralized calcium contributes to the solid bone matrix of bones, while dissolved calcium helps regulate enzyme activity and nervous system signaling. An atom, atomos, indivisible, is the smallest particle of an element that has a chemical characteristics of that element. An element is composed of atoms of only one kind. For example, the element carbon is composed only of carbon molecules, or atoms, and the element oxygen is composed only oxygen atoms. An element or an atom of that element is often represented by a symbol. Usually the symbol is the first letter or letters in the element's name. For example, C for carbon, H for hydrogen, Ca for calcium. Occasionally, the symbol is taken out from the Latin, Greek, or Arabic name of the element. For example, the symbol for sodium is Na from the Latin natrium. Atomic structure. The characteristics of matter result from the structure, organization, and behavior of atoms. Atoms are composed of subatomic particles, some of which have an electrical charge. The three major types of subatomic particles are neutrons, protons, and electrons. Figure 2.1. A neutron has no electrical charge. A proton has one positive charge, and an electron has one negative charge. The positive charge of a proton is equal to the magnitude of the negative charge on the electron. The number of protons and the number of electrons in each atom are equal, and individual charges cancel each other. Therefore, each atom is electrically neutral. Protons and neutrons from the nucleus of the center of the atom, and electrons move around the nucleus, figure 2.1. The nucleus accounts for 99.97% of an atom's mass, but only 1/10 trillionth of its volume. Most of the volume of an atom is occupied by the electrons. Because the electrons are always moving around the nucleus, the region where they are most likely can be found can be represented by an electron cloud. Atomic number and mass number. Atomic number and mass number. Each element is uniquely defined by the number of protons in the atoms of that element. For example, only hydrogen atoms have 1 proton, only carbon atoms have 6 protons, and only oxygen atoms have 8 protons, figure 2.2 and table 2.1. The atomic number of an element is equal to the number of protons in each atom, and because the number of electrons is equal to the number of protons, the atomic number is also the number of electrons. There are 90 naturally occurring elements, but additional elements have been synthesized by altering atomic nuclei. See the periodic table in Appendix A for additional information about the elements. Protons and neutrons have about the same mass, and they are responsible for most of the mass of the neutron. Electrons, on the other hand, have very little mass. The mass number of an element is the number of protons plus the number of neutrons in each atom. For example, the mass number of carbon is 12 because it has 6 protons and 6 neutrons. Isotopes and atomic mass. Isotopes are 2 or more forms of the same element that have the same number of protons and electrons but a different number of neutrons. Thus, isotopes have the same atomic number but different mass numbers. There are 3 isotopes for hydrogen: deuterium, and tritium. All 3 isotopes have 1 proton and 1 electron, but hydrogen has no neutrons in its nucleus. Deuterium has 1 neutron, and tritium has 2 neutrons, figure 2.3. Isotopes can be denoted using the symbol of the element preceded by the mass number of protons and neutrons of the isotope. Thus, hydrogen is 1H, deuterium is 2H, and tritium is 3H. Individual atoms have very little mass. A hydrogen atom has a mass of 1.67 times 10 to the negative 24th grams. See Appendix B for the explanation of scientific notation and numbers. To avoid working with such small numbers, scientists use a system of relative atomic mass. In this system, a Dalton, dA, or unified atomic mass number, U, is 1/12 of the mass of 12C. A carbon atom has 6 protons and 6 neutrons. Thus, 12C has an atomic mass of exactly 12 Da. However, a naturally occurring sample of carbon contains mostly 12C and small quantities of other carbon isotopes, such as 13C, which has 6 protons and 7 neutrons. The atomic mass of an element is the average mass of its naturally occurring isotopes, taken into account for relative abundance of each isotope. For example, the atomic mass of an element carbon is 12.01 Da. See Table 2.1. Which is slightly more than 12 Da because the additional mass of small amount of other carbon isotopes. Because the atomic mass is an average, the sample of carbon can be treated as if the carbon atoms had an atomic mass of 12.01 Da. The mole and molar mass. Just as a grocer sells eggs in lots of a dozen, a chemist groups atoms in lots of 6.022 times 10 to the 23, which is called Avogadro's number, or 1 mole, abbreviated mole, MOL. Stated another way, a mole of a substance contains Avogadro's number of entities such as atoms, ions, and molecules. The mass of 1 mole of a substance expressed in grams is called the molar mass. Molar mass is a convenient way to determine the number of atoms in a sample in an element because 12 grams of 12C is used as a standard. The atomic mass of an entity expressed in unified atomic mass units is the same as molar mass expressed in grams. Thus, carbon atoms have an atomic mass of 12.01 Da, and 12.01 grams of carbon has Avogadro's number, 1 mole of carbon atoms. By the same token, 1.008 grams of hydrogen, 1 mole, has the same number of atoms as 12.01 grams of carbon, 1 mole.